The arena lights blazed down like 1,000 suns, reflecting off the roaring sea of fans packed shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't just a fight night, it was Miguel the King Cortez night, the undefeated UFC champion, the man who claimed he could knock out anyone breathing. His walkouts were louder than concerts, his attitude louder than his punches. Tonight, though, something felt different. As Miguel strutted across the octagon, microphone in hand, the noise slowly faded. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. The crowd could sense he was about to do something reckless. I lifted the mic, smirk painted across his face. "Yo, cut the music," he barked. The EJ stopped instantly. Silence crept across the stadium like a cold wind. Miguel turned his head toward the front row, toward a single man who sat with perfect stillness. Gents. Simple boats. A calm posture, arms folded, gaze steady. Chuck Norris. The legend. The icon. The man whose name was almost AMYT at this point, whispered in jokes, quoted in GYMS, respected by every martial artist alive. But not by Miguel. No, Miguel didn't believe in legends. Miguel only believed in Miguel. I jabbed a finger toward Chuck. "Hey grandpa," he said into the mic, voice echoing off every wall, "how about you step in the cage with me?" A nervous laugh rippled through the audience. Miguel wasn't done. "I'll knock you out in 10 seconds flat," he added, stretching each word like a tongue dripping with venom. This time, the crowd didn't lag. They gasped. Cameras immediately zoomed to Chuck. Every screen in the arena showed his face, lined with age, but carrying a calmness that didn't look human. I didn't shift. Didn't flinch. Didn't even raise an eyebrow. I just smiled. Not a big smile. Not a theatrical one. Just a teeny, gnawing curve of the lips, the kind a master gives a student who doesn't realize class has already started. And for the first time all night, Miguel's grin faltered. Because in that single smile, he felt something no opponent had ever made him feel. A chill. A warning. A whisper of fear. And he had no idea that calling out Chuck Norris would become the biggest mistake of his career. Miguel Cortez wasn't just a champion, he was a storm. Fast, violent, unpredictable. He walked into every arena like he owned the walls, the lights, the air people breathed. And after a year of destroying every opponent placed in front of him, the fame didn't just rise to his head, it replaced it. I stopped listening to trainers. Stopped thanking his team. Stopped respecting anyone who couldn't punch as hard as he could. Reporters loved him. Fans hated him. Sponsors tolerated him because money talks louder than humility. He mocked sparring partners, calling them warm-up toys. He humiliated rookies by replaying their mistakes on the big screen in the GYM, lagging while they turned red. He even told his veteran coach, the man who trained him since he was Labimpito, "I'm the draw now. Without me, this sport is nothing." People whispered behind his back, but Miguel didn't care. In his mind, fear was respect, and everyone feared him. So when he was chosen to headline the annual UFC Legends charity exhibition, he didn't see it as an honor. He saw it as another stage to feed his ego. But that night, under the bright lights, there was one man in attendance who had zero interest in Miguel's fame. A man who had earned respect long before Miguel was even born. Chuck Norris. The legend of legends. The man whose shadow had trained generations. A pioneer of martial arts, film combat, discipline, and philosophy. He didn't show up with a camera crew. He didn't show up with an entourage. He walked in quietly, shook hands with staff, and took a seat in the front row like a humble spectator. But even sitting silently, he drew more attention than Miguel's entire entrance. And that enraged the champion. Miguel couldn't stand the idea that an old man, even a famous one, was stealing his spotlight simply by existing. So he grabbed the mic and stepped toward the edge of the cage, eyes narrowed with irritation. "How about it, old man?" he taunted, his voice blasting through the arena speakers. "Wanna show the world those dusty bones still work?" A few fans groaned. Some booed. Others gasped in disbelief. Miguel wasn't finished. Or, he tapped the cage with a smirk. "Are you scared this place might break you?" This time, the cameras didn't stay on Miguel. Every lens, every phone, every spotlight shifted toward Chuck Norris. You could feel the air tighten. Chuck remained seated for a moment, hands folded, gaze calm. Not offended. Not upset. Not even surprised. Almost as if he'd predicted this exact moment. The commentators whispered urgently. "Oh, I know. Miguel has no idea what he's doing. That's Chuck Norris, you don't poke Chuck Norris." This could end badly, and not for Chuck. A wave of tension rippled through the crowd. Even the fighters backstage peered at the monitors, frozen. Miguel laughed, thinking the silence meant victory. "You see that," he shouted, "even legends know better than to face me." But then, Chuck moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Placed his hands on the armrests. Shifted his way. Stood up with the kind of posture that made even the cameras back up. Miguel's grin faded just a little. Not enough for the cameras to notice, but enough for his pulse to skip. Chuck's eyes locked onto his. No anger. No fear. Just calm certainty. I took one step forward. Then another. And another. The arena didn't cheer. Didn't roar. Did nothing but watch. Because everyone knew something Miguel didn't. When Chuck Norris stands, trouble follows. Miguel swallowed hard. Chuck didn't break eye contact as he approached the cage. And placed one hand on the door. The crowd held its breath. It was coming in. And Miguel, for the first time all night, felt something he wasn't used to feeling. Doubt. Miguel began bouncing on the balls of his feet, rolling his shoulders, cracking his neck from side to side. This was familiar ground, the cage, the lights, the crowd chanting his name. He felt at home here, and nothing boosted his confidence more than performing in front of thousands of eyes. Chuck Norris, however, looked like he'd just stepped into a kid dojo for a morning stretch. Miguel laughed loudly, circling him like a predator that didn't realize it was circling a volcano. "Careful, Grandpa," he taunted. "Don't break a hip climbing in." Chuck ignored the words completely. He removed his jacket with slow, measured movements, folded it neatly, and set it outside the cage. No fanfare. No theatrics. Just calm precision. As he stepped inside, the cage door shut behind him with a metallic clang. To the audience, it sounded less like a door closing. And more like a warning bell. Chuck stood in the center of the mat, posture relaxed, hands loosely at his sides. His breathing barely noticeable. Miguel raised his fists. "Let's go, legend," Miguel snorted. "Show the world something." Chuck lifted his gaze. "I won't fight you, son." Miguel blinked. "Oh? Scared?" "No," Chuck replied, voice steady and patient. "I don't need to hit someone to teach them a lesson." The crowd murmured. Phones zoomed in. Even the announcers leaned closer to their mix. Miguel rolled his eyes dramatically and spread his arms wide. "Whatever, man. Just stand still so I can end this." I didn't wait for a response. Miguel charged. A burst of speed. A blur of muscle. A move that had knocked out multiple fighters, champions, veterans. The crowd screamed. But Chuck didn't move. Not at first. He waited until Miguel's fist was half an inch from his face, then shifted. Just a subtle turn of the shoulder, a gentle tilt of the chin, a movement so small most spectators didn't even see it. Miguel's punch sliced through empty air. His own momentum yanked him forward. His feet scrambled to catch balance. He stumbled, staggered, and barely kept himself from falling face first into the mat. The crowd roared with disbelief. Miguel spun back around, flustered. "You lucky old." He caught himself, snarling. Chuck stood exactly where he had before. Not even breathing hard. Miguel's nostrils flared. "All right," he growled. "Let's see you dodge this." He lunged again, faster this time, throwing a barrage of punches, hooks, and jabs. His arms were a blur. Sweat flicked through the air from the sheer speed. He aimed for the head, the ribs, the chin. But Chuck wasn't even fighting. He shifted an inch to the left. Tilted his torso a hair to the right. Stepped back the width of a toenail. Every punch missed. Miguel hit nothing but air. It was like trying to hit smoke. Or wind. Or an idea. The crowd realized it. Miguel didn't. "Stop running." Miguel shouted, breath starting to hitch. "Fight me." Chuck's voice was calm as water. "You're fighting yourself, son." Miguel roared and launched forward with a spinning elbow. One of his most powerful moves, the finisher that had ended careers. Chuck simply bent his knees. Miguel's elbow whooshed over his head as he twirled off balance, landing hard on his shoulder. He rolled to his knees, gasping. The audience erupted, some cheering, some lagging, some unable to process what they were witnessing. Chuck stepped forward, offering a hand to help Miguel up. Miguel slapped it away and shot to his feet. "No," he snapped, red-faced. "I'm not done." Chuck sighed softly. "You're already done. You just don't know it yet." Miguel charged a third time, willed, reckless, fueled by humiliation rather than strategy. Chuck didn't dodge this time. Instead, he stepped beside Miguel, placed 2 fingers lightly on the back of Miguel's neck, and redirected his energy downward. Miguel's legs flew out from under him like a rug had been pulled. He crashed flat on his back, breath exploding from his lungs. The arena went silent. Chuck didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't even change expression. He simply said, "Anger blinds. Ego defense. That's why you can see what's right in front of you, and why you can hear the lesson." Miguel lay there, stunned, staring up at the lights he once believed he owned. For the first time in his career, the undefeated champion realized something horrifying. He wasn't fighting a man. He was facing wisdom. And wisdom was winning without throwing a single punch. Miguel's fist tore through the air like a missile, powerful, fast, and backed by years of brutal knockout victories. The punch was perfect. Deadly. The kind of strike that could end a fight in a single heartbeat. But just as it neared Chuck's jaw, Chuck shifted 1 inch. On. To the left. Effortless. Almost casual. Miguel's fist cut through nothing but empty space. His own power betrayed him. His speed carried him forward without balance, without control, without aim. He stumbled, flailed, then crashed face first onto the mat with aid that echoed through the arena. For half a second, the stadium was silent. Then it erupted. Laughter. Gasps. Cheers. Disbelief. Miguel scrambled up, whipping blood from his nose, his ears turning bright red. "Lucky," he shouted, voice cracking. "Try that again, old man." Chuck didn't react. He didn't smirk. He didn't taunt. He simply stood there, calm, centered, grounded like a mountain that had survived centuries of storms. Miguel's pride couldn't take it. He rushed again. This time, he aimed lower, trying to tackle Chuck, trying to use brute force instead of technique. But Chuck just stepped aside. A teeny movement. Miguel crashed again, rolling across the floor like a rookie on his first day at the GYM. Laughter thundered across the arena. The crowd wasn't lagging with Miguel. They were lagging at him. He pushed himself up, panting, fury radiating from every pore. "No. No. No. Get back here," he shouted, charging for the 3rd time. Chuck didn't even step aside this round. He just angled his body gently, barely a shift. And Miguel flew past him, arms swinging wildly, his legs tangled beneath him until he collapsed into the cage wall with a painful reverberation. A ripple of sympathy spread through the audience, followed immediately by another wave of laughter. Even the commentators didn't know how to narrate what they were seeing. I have no words. Miguel looks like he's fighting a ghost. He's hitting the floor more than he hits opponents. Miguel staggered upright again. He didn't look like a champion anymore. He looked like a drowning man, desperate, panicked, flailing for dignity he could no longer reach. But he kept coming. 4th attempt. 5th attempt. Each one more unstable, more uncontrolled, more frantic. And every time he lunged, Chuck simply redirected the energy, barely touching him, barely moving. A hand on the wrist. A tap to the elbow. A little pressure on the shoulder. Not strikes. Not blocks. Just pure, refined redirection. The kind only a master could perform. Miguel wasn't being defeated. He was being undone. His own power, his own aggression, his own pride, turned against him in the simplest way possible. Every failed charge drained him. Every stumble humiliated him. Every fall chipped away at the invincible image he had built. By the 5th fall, his chest was heaving like a runner after a marathon. Sweat poured down his temples. His arms shook. His legs wobbled beneath him. But worst of all, his eyes had changed. The arrogant fire was gone. Replaced by something raw, something unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of pain, not fear of defeat, but fear of the truth. I was completely outclassed by a man nearly twice his age. Miguel wiped his face, trying to steady his breathing. You're cheating," he accused between gasps. "You have to be. No one moves like that." Chuck tilted his head slightly, amused but empathetic. "You're fighting your own ego," he said softly. "I'm just standing here." Miguel shook his head wildly, refusing to accept the words, refusing to accept what the world was seeing. A champion outmatched. A king dethroned. A storm calmed by a breeze. No. On more. Miguel snarled, trying to gather strength he no longer had. I pushed off the mat once more, sprinting toward Chuck with an uncoordinated, exhausted fury. His movements were sloppy now, his punches telegraphed, his balance broken. And Chuck didn't move until the very last microsecond. I placed one hand on Miguel's shoulder. Barely a touch. Miguel's body rotated, spun, and toppled like a tree cut at its base. I crashed down, the sound sharp, final, devastating. This time, he didn't scramble up. He lay there, chest racing and falling like a drum beaten too long. Hands trembling. Ace glassy. The undefeated UFC champion. Look defeated without Chuck Norris ever throwing a single punch. The crowd didn't laugh now. They didn't cheer. They just watched, awestruck, breathless, silent, as Miguel realized the truth in front of millions. He wasn't fighting Chuck Norris. He was fighting the consequences of his arrogance. For a long moment, the arena held its breath. Miguel knelt on the mat, shoulders hunched, chest pumping like bellows. Sweat dripped from his chin, creating teeny dark spots on the canvas beneath him. The once invincible UFC champion looked nothing like the unstoppable force he always claimed to be. He looked human. Exhausted. Shaken. Exposed. And Chuck Norris hadn't even thrown a single strike. Finally Chuck raised a hand, slowly, gently, like a master calling a halt to a lesson only one man didn't realize he was in. Miguel, Chuck said, voice calm, carrying easily across the silent stadium. A true fighter controls his ego before he controls a cage. Miguel blinked, breathing ragged. His lips trembled, unable to form words. But I'm the champion, he stuttered, sounding more like a child defending a broken toy than a warrior defending a legacy. Chuck stepped closer, his shadow falling over Miguel like a quiet reminder of everything he had yet to learn. Champions don't insult elders, Chuck said. In my day, we respected who came before us. That's why we lasted. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They hit Miguel harder than any punch ever caught. Miguel's hands pressed against the canvas, fingers trembling. I couldn't lift his head. Not with tens of thousands of eyes on him. Not with millions more watching from screens around the world. His entire career had been built on bravado, confidence, fearlessness. But in this moment he felt smaller than he ever had in his life. The arena, once filled with chants of Miguel, Miguel, was now shaking with a different name. A name that carried more weight than titles. More weight than belts. More weight than fame. Chuck. 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 The chant rolled through the stadium like thunder, wave after wave slamming into Miguel's pride. He swallowed hard, throat burning. His ego, the thing he valued most, dissolved under the weight of those three syllables. His eyes squeezed shut. I had wanted attention. I had wanted the spotlight. I had wanted to make a statement. I had, just not the one he intended. Miguel slowly lowered his head until his forehead touched the mat. He tried to hide the shame on his face, but shame has a way of fending its own audience. Chuck stepped even closer, the chairs growing louder with each step. Miguel, Chuck said, the cage doesn't make you a champion. The crowd doesn't make you one either. Miguel's voice broke. I didn't mean. You meant every word, Chuck said softly. And that's the problem. Miguel wins. You see, Chuck continued, strength without humility is just chaos. Power without respect is just noise. Miguel's breaths grew uneven. His chest tightened. Chuck crouched slightly, not in aggression, but in empathy. When I was your age, Chuck said, I fought to prove myself. But I learned that a fighter's greatest opponent is his own ego. Miguel finally lifted his head just enough to look at him. His eyes were red from exertion, humiliation, maybe even a hint of tears. But I'm the best, Miguel whispered, voice stripped of confidence. Chuck shook his head. The best don't need to say they're the best. People say it for them. Miguel's throat tightened painfully. Those chants, echoing all around him, weren't saying his name. They weren't celebrating him. They were celebrating the man who had humbled him without cruelty, without violence, without even trying to embarrass him. And that made it hurt even more. You walked into this cage, Chuck said gently, to prove you could beat an old man. Miguel lowered his gaze again. But what you really proved, is that you have much to learn. More chants. Chuck. 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 Miguel's eyes glistened. I pressed a fist to the mat, trying to steady himself. Everything inside him, the arrogance, the ego, the bravado, was cracking under the truth. Chuck extended a hand. Not in victory. Not in dominance. In guidance. Miguel stared at it. His lip trembled. His chest heaved. I didn't feel like a champion anymore. I felt like a student. Slowly, painfully slowly, he placed his hand in Chuck Norris. And as Chuck helped him to his feet, the arena roared with approval. Miguel didn't look at the crowd. I didn't wave. I didn't posture. I just stood there, humbled, shaking, beaten without a single strike thrown. Chuck placed a hand on his shoulder. Now, Chuck said quietly, you can begin becoming a real champion. And Miguel nodded, because for the first time, he finally understood what that word truly meant. Miguel didn't understand how he was still standing. His lungs burned. His head echoed with the sound of 1,000 embarrassed heartbeats. Sweat dripped to the canvas in steady drops, each one a reminder of how far he'd fallen in just a few minutes. A champion. Reduced to a spectacle. And yet, Chuck Norris didn't look smug. Didn't look victorious. Didn't even look amused. He just looked like a grandfather who'd watched his grandson throw a tantrum. Chuck extended a hand. Miguel, he said softly, every fighter slips. Every fighter stumbles. The question is, do you get up as a better man, or the same one who fell? Miguel stared at the hand. The entire arena held its breath. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was a moment. Miguel gulped down his pride and took the hand. Chuck pulled him up with surprising strength. Gasps rippled across the stadium, not because of the lift, but because the most arrogant champion in the UFC had just bowed his head in front of another man. A man nearly twice his age. I'm sorry, sir, Miguel said, voice trembling. I disrespected you. Disrespected the sport. Chuck offered a small nod, skin but sharp. Humility isn't weakness, son. It's the foundation that keeps everything else standing. Without it, even the strongest fighter collapses. Miguel shook his head, ashamed. I thought being champion meant being untouchable. Acting bigger, louder, taller. Chuck chuckled. That's not toughness. That's noise. Miguel looked up. Then what is toughness? Chuck placed a hand on the young champion's shoulder. Knowing when you're wrong. Admitting it. Growing from it. The words hit Miguel harder than any punch had ever taken. The crowd, silent until now, began to stare. A slow, racing wave of applause rolled through the seats. Not for the humiliation. Not for the spectacle. For the lesson. For the respect being reclaimed. Miguel wiped his face. All those fighters I mocked, the rookies I embarrassed, the trainers I brushed off. You can still make it right, Chuck said. A real champion lifts others. He doesn't step on them. Miguel nodded, as classy. And then, something unexpected happened. The UFC officials approached the cage, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment breathe. The cameras zoomed in. Social media was exploding. Hashtags, memes, clips, already spiraling across the internet. But inside the cage, it was quiet. Intimate. Human. Chuck gave Miguel a small smile. You know, he said, I didn't step in here to fight you. Miguel smirked weakly. Cud fooled me. Chuck shook his head. I stepped in to stop you from fighting yourself. Miguel froze. The words sank straight into the part of him he never showed, the insecure, pressured, exhausted young man buried beneath the bravado. Chuck continued. You're gifted, Miguel. Truly. But gifts mean nothing if they're locked behind ego. You've got power, speed, discipline, but your attitude. That's what holds you back. Miguel ran a hand through his hair. So what do I do now? Start by apologizing. To your team. To the rookies. To the sport you claim to love. Miguel inhaled deeply. I will. And then, Chuck said with a wink, you train twice as hard. Skill fades. Ego grows. Balance them. Miguel actually laughed. A tired, honest laugh. You make it sound easy. Chuck tapped his chest. It's never easy. But it's always worth it. The arena lights dimmed slightly as the announcer hesitated, unsure if this was the end of the event or the beginning of something new. Miguel stepped back and raised Chuck's hand high into the air. The audience erupted, thunderous applause, cheers, chants. Chuck! 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 For the first time that night, Miguel didn't feel threatened by the sound. I felt relieved. Thank you, he said quietly. For not embarrassing me more than I did myself. Chuck laughed. Trust me, son. If I wanted to embarrass you, you'd still be on the floor. Miguel's eyes widened. Chuck winked. The tension finally broke, and Miguel cracked a real smile, one that looked nothing like the cocky smirk had walked in with. Before leaving the cage, Chuck leaned in. Remember this, Miguel, fighters win matches. Champions win people. Miguel swallowed, nodding. I won't forget. Chuck patted his shoulder. Good. Now you're ready. They walked toward the cage door together, side by side, not as legend and challenger, but as mentor and student. Behind them, the crowd roared louder than any knockout, any submission, any title celebration. Miguel didn't win a fight that night. But he won something far more important. He won himself back. The arena lights slowly dimmed, leaving only the echoes of chairs bouncing off the walls. The crowd, once roaring for a fight, now cheered for something else entirely. Lesson learned, humility recognized, respect earned. Miguel the King Cortez had come to the cage expecting to dominate, to humiliate, to prove himself. Instead, he left changed, humbled, enlightened, and reminded of the one thing he had almost forgotten: respect. Respect isn't about age. It isn't about titles or fame. It isn't even about who can punch harder or faster. It's about seeing the value in others, even when they seem smaller, older, quieter, even when their power isn't obvious. Chuck Norris didn't yell, didn't taunt, didn't flatter his legendary reputation. He simply stood, a living reminder that true strength often doesn't announce itself. And in that quiet, Miguel saw a reflection of everything he had been missing: discipline, patience, humility, the foundations of a true champion. Strength isn't just about muscle. It's about control. It's about knowing when to strike and when to hold back, when to dominate and when to guide. Miguel had all the physical strength he could ever want. But in this cage, he learned that strength without wisdom is like a sword without a hand to guide it. It can only harm the wielder. Wisdom doesn't shout. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't demand attention. Wisdom waits, it observes, it teaches when the time is right. Chuck Norris didn't need to strike once to dominate the fight. He redirected, guided, and humbled. And in doing so, he taught a lesson louder than any punch, louder than any knockout. A lesson that would last far beyond the walls of that cage, far beyond the thousands of fans watching in awe. Miguel's chest still heaved, sweat soaking his shirt, pride bruised, ego battered. But he was smiling now, not the arrogant smirk he had worn at the start, but a real, thoughtful smile. One that carried understanding. One that acknowledged his mistakes. One that knew there was much more to learn. I looked around at the crowd. Phones recording every moment, commentators repeating every word, social media buzzing worldwide. And for the first time, Miguel realized the world wasn't watching him to see him win. They were watching to see him grow. Chuck Norris patted his shoulder once more, quietly, without ceremony. Remember this, Miguel: fighters win matches. Champions win people. Miguel nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. I understood now. I had fought the hardest battle, not in the cage, but inside himself. I had faced his pride, his arrogance, his ego, and he had survived. The crowd erupted one last time, chanting, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Their voices thundered through the arena, carrying respect, admiration, and awe. Miguel raised his hand, not in triumph over a fight, but in gratitude, acknowledging the man who had just changed his life forever. And as Chuck walked toward the exit, calm and composed as ever, Miguel watched him go, the lesson etched permanently into his mind. It was a moment he would carry into every fight, every training session, every challenge that lay ahead. A reminder that true power is silent. True respect is earned. So here's the takeaway, for everyone watching: ego destroys more champions than any opponent ever caught. Power without humility is nothing. Strength without wisdom is fleeting. And arrogance will always find someone patient enough to show you the truth. If you believe in humility, in learning from others, in respecting everyone, even those you think are weaker, older, or slower, type respect in the comments. Let the world know you understand the value of true strength. And now the question is yours: fire or forgive? Should Miguel get a rematch with Chuck Norris? Or should he continue to grow as a fighter before stepping back into the cage with a legend? Comment below. Let's see who truly understands what it means to be a champion. Because at the end of the day, it's not the victories that define you. It's the lessons you learn when you fall, the grace you show when you're humbled, and the respect you give when no one is watching.